Hello and welcome to Conversations with Elizabeth Ellen Carter. Today, my very, very special guest is Caroline Warfield. She is an angel inside and out, such a lovely lady who I had the honor to meet in person for the first time in 2019's Historical Romance Retreat in Riverside in California. And we had such a great time. Caroline is also one of the Blue Stocking Belles, a very gifted author, and she also happens to be a Dragonblade author as well. And there's a growing list of fantastic historical romance authors with Dragonblade. Hello, Caroline. How are you?
Hello, Elizabeth. I am well. I'm well. I'm very well. It's Saturday night here in the United States. Saturday is, of course, football day in the United States, our kind of football. This is my alma mater's symbol here. I went to the Ohio State University, and I'm a huge fan of their team, and they're about to play in an hour, so hence the outfit.
Fantastic. And this is college football?
College football. I don't do the pro stuff. Well, now that I live near Philadelphia, I also have a pro team to root for, but I never did that before. It's different. It's not the same game.
Yes, well, our football season has ended for the year. We've got two major types of football that run concurrently. That is rugby league, and the other one is Australian rules football, which is a variation of Gaelic football, and they run from March until September. And the grand finals for each of the two competitions are 2 weeks apart. So,
so only halfway through, things are heating up.
So now we're in cricket season. So we've got the.
So we don't play that here.
It's funny, and we're going off in a completely different tangent. I was doing some research for my first novel, and I found. And I've forgotten the name of this particular British peer. He was absolutely dedicated to cricket, and the first international test took place between England and France in actually was about to, and then the revolution happened. So this was in 1788. And at one point, he was ambassador to France, and he got the Americans playing cricket down the Champs-Élysées. So
it's the last time a group of Americans played cricket, I have a feeling. Although we've never quite figured out where baseball came from. No one's absolutely sure, but it has to be related to cricket. It has to be.
Actually, I can see some real similarities. The fielding with the very specific positions appears to be the same, but you're running around a diamond instead of instead of a wicket.
Right.
There we actually the one for the list to investigate.
We'll revisit this someday. I'll tell you the impact of baseball on the American language someday.
Look, it's one of those things that sort of crosses international boundaries, but still one can sort of experience a sticky wicket, old chap.
So we were talking about Dragonblade earlier. It is a little like drinking from a fire hose. They believe in rapid publication. And I will tell you that recently it dawned on me that I think Dragonblade has turned me from a writer to a professional author.
Wow.
It's a phrase that I heard Virginia Heath use, but I think it is the world in which, okay, I have one out there, I have one in the publication pipeline, I have one in the editing phase, and then the next one is just sort of in the planning stage. And to keep that flow going is what a professional does. It's not like I write a book, oh, that was nice, I'm going to just rest on my laurels here for a little bit, and then I'll think about a sequel. No, we write is what we do.
and this is it. Dragonblade is absolutely. There are very few people who can take a dream, take a concept, and flesh it out as fully and make it happen as seamlessly as Catherine Levesque has done with
right.
Dragonblade. It's like she's taken what is the ideal publisher. What does that look like from an author perspective? And she's gone to create that. And I think the authors who are part of Dragonblade have I know from my own experience that sort of, yeah, my game has lifted.
It has, but you feel completely supported in that. I mean, she is a writer's writer and an enormously generous, warm heart. So it is, yes. What would a writer's publishing company look like, rather than the writer being kind of a minor part in all this? You sometimes feel these big publishers don't take us seriously.
Well, basically, where under those circumstances, the writers are grist to the mill.
Yeah. Yes.
It's sort of it's the product they churn out, whereas there's the integrity, and I mean that in its fullest sense. How it's integrated in Dragonblade is something to behold. It really is.
It's marvelous. It's marvelous. They're just wonderful people all down the line. It's been a real joy. It's been hard work, but it's been a real joy. I think they've just tacked 2 more books on the end of my contract, because there were 2 characters in The Defiant Daughter that I had various readers go, well, you have to write 2 more books. You have to. Both of these gentlemen need a book. So I think we're going to do it.
So tell me about this series. So tell me about this series.
Well, I began thinking, this is on the airplane coming back from New Zealand. Actually, I was coming back from HHR. I was on the airplane coming back from one of the writers' retreats. And I was thinking, I am tired of dragging my characters all over the entire British Empire. I think I want to set a series in a little village. And I want the village to have a little inn. So then you have an inn, then you have an innkeeper. The innkeeper has a family. Pretty soon my mind was 90 miles down the road. And how I came up with the fact that the innkeeper's son was the Earl's bastard, I'm not sure, but that sort of opened up the door to the entire series. So I had this Earl who wrote a will spiteful to his legitimate son. He was angry with him. So in his cups one night, he wrote a will cutting the legitimate heir out and taking everything he could and stripping it from the estate and giving it to his illegitimate children, naming them by name with their mothers in the will.
Oh, ow.
So the first was the wayward son. That was the innkeeper's son. They'd grown up together. They knew each other, but they were like 12 or 14 before they figured this out. And unfortunately, the wayward son discovered this in a very unfortunate way. And like teenage boys sometimes do, didn't handle it well. He ran off to take the king's shilling. He was not sticking around Ashmead to be looked down upon by his half-brother, the Earl's heir. And at the beginning of that book, he's back. And he's back and he's discovered that he's been left a piece of land, which he isn't sure he wants, but he's stuck back at Ashmead because it's pulling him in. The Defiant Daughter is the eldest legitimate daughter. And the will said, to my defiant daughter, Madeline, I leave nothing. So that's Madeline's beginning. That's her story. And in fact, she had very little in her marriage settlements either. So she's a widow, but she's a very poor dowager duchess living on her brother's charity. And her brother, poor, God love her brother, doesn't have much because of what their father did. Her stepson would happily have done better by her, but she wanted nothing to do with that whole family and that estate. And she'd left a very bad marriage behind, and she's living a quiet life, which of course gets shaken up. And she has to go back and deal with these people.
What's really interesting is the family dynamics that you've created in this, and I think really relatable, because unfortunately family dramas do happen.
Family dramas happen. Families are messy, and I like that. I like that. I'm writing the third book right now, and well, maybe I'll go into him later. But in the middle of this village, you have these two families, and there are more siblings. There are half siblings on both sides, and they're all sort of interacting with each other. Mm-hmm. And they all come back. Ashmead is the heart and soul. They might wander away in various parts of the book. In fact, the Duchess ends up going to Wales because she's looking for a stepson she'd been told was dead.
Right.
That she has reason to suspect was sent away. Right. She knows he was sent away. She was later told he died, but she isn't sure she believes it. So she goes back. She goes to look for him. And of course, he's not dead.
The setup reminds me, sort of the thing that comes to mind as a parallel is the Barchester Chronicles, and that was set in a cathedral town, with a set of characters in it. I can't remember the name of the author, but it was turned into a television series in the early 80s, and Alan Rickman. It was one of his,
already.
It was one of his early roles, and he plays this sort of Weasley character, and it's fabulous. Because there is the family dynamic. There's I guess it always encapsulates the 7 deadly sins, and sort of the dynamic that we all have as families to try and smooth out our worst excesses, where there is a feeling of goodwill amongst family members, and then there's the relationships that never get dealt with and are never spoken of again.
No, actually, in The Defiant Daughter, the hero also has issues. He turns up in book 1 as the good friend of the wayward son, mm-hmm. the half brother. So that's how she meets him. But when he discovers she plans to go to Wales to look for this guy, he's from there. He is a coal miner's son. He's now a half-pay colonel living in London, who doesn't have 2 nickels to rub together. The reason he doesn't have any money is every dime he's ever made, any prize money, everything has been sent back to a family that was injured in an explosion in his father's mine. Traumatized him completely. He wants nothing to do with mining, and he sends every dime back, and he just won't communicate at all. So he decides she can't go alone, so he has to go back and face his demons at the same time. His father's gone. His brother now owns 3 mines. And he has to face the fact that it isn't all bad. Not everybody is bad. Not everybody does things the same way. In the course of the story, they visit 3 or 4, so the differences are stark in terms of how young children are sent into the mines, what kind of safety precautions are being taken. They vary, and he has to accept that maybe he was just a little closed-minded.
Yeah. A few years ago, I read the Road to Wigan Pier, and the description of coal mining in the north of England in the 20s, when it
was safer then, but not much.
Yeah. Not much. Sort of, and I've gone a blank on the author of that, which is absolutely ridiculous because he wrote 1984.
George Orwell.
Oh, George Orwell. George Orwell wrote the Road to Wigan Pier, and he travelled north from London to Wigan, looking at the lives of working class. People having to walk 1 mile into the to get to the coalface, and they weren't on the clock until they were at the coalface. And then they
in the dark.
In the dark, and walk 1 mile out. Families were involved. The men would be at the picks. The women would be sort of gathering the coal into carts and pushing the carts back up to the surface.
Yes, exactly. If they were
of,
lucky, there was a rail system that would help pull the carts out, but that required an investment. It was expensive. So even in 1818, there were some mines who had it and some mines that didn't.
Yeah, the pit ponies.
What jobs were given to 5-year-olds?
Yeah.
I mean, this got into this whole discussion. You will notice that while I do have the occasional titled person in my book, I really have a weakness for the working class, and especially for the middle class. Well, you may have noticed that in my short stories, like the ones we're writing. I will always go for the younger son, the professional person in choosing a hero. I just feel more comfortable in that world.
I hear you. I've written my first book, and it's sort of now it's my 11th title. But even then, before the Duke becomes the Duke, he's the Earl who's had a fractious relationship with his father, and ends up working at his father's textile mill in Glasgow. So, and it's really interesting, the dynamic of the readership, the reader relationship with historical romance is you've got people who are quite happy to be drawn into a good story, and then you've got people who go, I want the Cinderella fantasy, and sort of too many dukes are never enough. And
and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. I just don't write it.
It's the richness of that era. And
we've talked about history before. How much is too much history? How much is too little? To write something that seems authentic to an era requires quite a bit of research, actually. The various places you can get it. I'm fond of directories, county directories, business directories, to find out, what kind of businesses might have existed in Ashmead. Well, quite a few, actually. They might have had a printer. They might have had a bookstore. That seems unlikely. They would have had a tailor. They might have had a milliner. It just, you go through these little towns and you look at what's there, and it's kind of interesting. It's not hard to come up with these characters. The hero of the one in progress right now is the land steward for the Earl. He's he's also the half brother from the inn. He's the innkeeper's full son, so he's half brother to the bastard son, brother of the Earl, and he's now his steward. And while the other two are heroes, Eli is he's the fixer. He's the one that does the underlying work that makes things happen. So he doesn't think of himself as a hero, because that's his brother and the Earl. He's just the one making it all. He's the glue that holds it all together, actually. And he's been real interesting to write.
Well, it's really interesting, sort of the nature of the hero, and what actually defines the hero. And it isn't necessarily the leading man out in front that without sort of the people doing their jobs diligently in the background, the big things don't get done. So yeah, the
soldier in the field, that's the hero, not the general.
Indeed. The relationship between people who then look at sort of the nobility. I guess what I'm saying is the nobility of doing one's job well is a form of heroism in itself, especially if that job is dirty and dangerous. To show up every day, to do it to the best of your ability, to maintain your humanity sometimes inhumane situations, to me is the definition of heroism.
But so is sometimes a different kind of leader. I was thinking of when you were speaking of North and South, where you have this man who owns a mill and he can't make everything perfect. And he has to make hard decisions that benefit the greater number of people over a longer period of time, even though sometimes they upset people, or they're not very nice, or they're not maybe some ideal of what a leader would do. People like that are very interesting. People who just want to do the responsible kinds of characters. I'm a big fan of Carla Kelly. She writes about physicians a lot. A lot of her characters and her heroes are military men, but they're often the military doctor, not the general in the field, or that sort of thing. Those are the kind of characters I like.
Oh, yeah. Well, basically field surgeons. It's sort of, wow.
She has one about Trafalgar
like
that blew me away. She has this American crew coming upon the aftermath of Trafalgar and becoming involved with the doctor cleaning up afterwards. That's just, what a heartrending story it is. Really good. In The Defiant Daughter, the hero is this coal miner's son who also was in the military. That's where he became friends with Rob. And but he became an engineer. He had military experience, but he also had mining engineering. So he ended up in the Royal Engineers when they were just forming as a separate group, the sappers and the builders and those people. And that's what he built his career on. And he was kind of interesting to write too.
How much research did you get into? It's sort of
always, you know. You'd be writing along, and then you have a question, and the next thing you know, the morning's gone. You've been looking for some detail that no one's going to care about but you. But it's fun to do constantly. It's like in the case of Bryn Morgan, it's like, well, were there engineers in the military? Well, of course there were. And then it turns out it actually came into being not long before my story. And he would have been in the very first cadre of officers of that part of the Army. And, I've just sort of got all wrapped up in that. You just never know what you're going to stumble on.
Well, this is it. This is it. And it's fun as authors, but you're right, it's sort of a lot of what we've researched doesn't necessarily make it into the book, but it's important for us to get the view on it, because even something which has a fleeting mention, we need to be satisfied it's right. Yes, we do. And it feeds how we think about the characters and how we feel about their life and how they're living. I get driven crazy by travel. I can't seem to write a book where people don't have to get from point A to point B. And then I worry about how long would it take and how many stops would be in the middle, and do I have to put them in an inn? Can I skip that? Can I just drop them off if I want them to go? It makes me crazy. 19th century teleporting. That's what we need.
Yes, please. Well, or fictional teleporting where it's 3 months later. They finally arrived. Someone to China one time, and I'm like, that's 8 months at sea. I think we're going to have to just skip ahead.
Well, that's it. And do you sort of hit the end of the Mediterranean and take the very dangerous sort of land route over? Or do you take the equally dangerous around Cape of Good Hope and Africa?
I was quite enchanted with the land route for a while when I discovered it existed, though, because they would go from India to Suez, across the desert to Cairo, up the river, through the canal, to the Mediterranean, to a steamboat to England. I was quite enchanted with that. So I sent children. So the little girl kept referring to it as, the way with the crocodiles, because she was sure the Nile had crocodiles.
I discovered that there was essentially a Suez Canal built by the Assyrians. That Darius.
It was logical to put one there, wasn't it?
Oh, absolutely. And apparently there was, when I was doing this research, it was something for 1815, around about there. So I think it's I don't think it's been destroyed since. There was a stele which they'd managed to translate,
Mm.
dedicating the opening of this passage.
Wow.
But when you see how basically sandy it is either side of the canal now, and the engineering that it took to stop it from silting,
It
yeah,
still does. Yeah.
it still does. And as long as you don't get the really big cargo ships just getting themselves trapped there, as one did earlier this year.
I got very interested in the history of Egypt in that period too, because there was so much going on, and the French got thrown out, and yet they never left. The French influence was there all the way up to the building of the canal.
Yes.
Yeah, because Muhammad Ali really valued Western learning, and it was the French he turned to give it to him.
Again, we could talk for hours and hours on this.
I love the way our brains work.
Well, sort of speaking of sort of earls who didn't do the right thing by their children, we've got The Desperate Daughters coming out in May next year, which I'm very, very excited by. I'm getting through everybody's stories, and
aren't they fun?
It's been great fun, not only to write the stories, but it's a different way of working with other authors, where it's a case of you are borrowing as your secondary characters their primary characters. Yeah. So getting the relationships right, getting the characterizations right.
This one was particularly complicated. We've done this before, but this one was really complicated because they were living in the same house, many of them. All these, what was it, 9 sisters, 10 sisters? I can never remember for sure.
9, yeah.
Little ones, yeah. And it was really fun. I'm amazed at what a good job we've done of keeping all our balls in the air. It's just turned out wonderful. And every one of the stories is dear. And now I have to go to York. I haven't been to York. And you with Harrogate, you brought up Harrogate, and I think 3 of the stories mention it. And I couldn't resist it. I had to put my heroine there.
I have a second cousin who lives in Starbeck, which we've called Starbrook in the book, and sort of, yes, Harrogate, Knaresborough. It's 60 miles away from York. It's 60 miles away from the sea.
Knaresborough. Is that how you pronounce that?
Knaresborough.
Knaresborough. Okay, which Harrogate, however you say that, was once part of. It was pulled out of.
Yes, and
that was an estate, right? If I understood it correctly.
That's it. So Starbeck is in the middle. So if you go one way, it's Harrogate, and if you go the other way, it's Knaresborough.
So that was kind of fun. But York itself is. I was always interested in it, but I'm even more interested now. I want to see all of these fabulous buildings.
And seeing the and seeing Jorvik. I've only, my grandparents have been there, and seeing the Viking experience, and seeing
there's
the
Roman bits here and there too.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a major northern post for the Romans, and it's sort of I can't wait to travel again.
Yeah, me either. Which leads me to this. I certainly hope you'll be able to travel again next year so we can meet again at the Historic Romance Retreat.
I really hope so. They haven't told us when.
We had handsome escorts last time. We need to do that again.
We certainly do. We certainly do. So hopefully they'll let us out of the country soon.
Well, we're planning on being there. It's a done deal. Greg's coming, so fantastic. I presume where you go, Duncan goes. So
yes, he does, and he had so much fun at last time, and really enjoyed spending time with your hubby too.
Oh, some of those pictures are such a stitch. Greg dealing cards with his cap, ruffian cap.
He was wonderful. He was absolutely
he had
wonderful.
A good time. Yeah, he's a good sport. He's a good sport.
And we've had a wide-ranging conversation. Thank you very much, Caroline.
Thank you very much. Good chatting with you.
It's great chatting with you.
Could I say another word about the Defiant Daughter?
Absolutely.
I had one reader tell me that my previous work really stirred her imagination, but this series really captured her heart. And I think in some ways, Defiant Daughter is the most heartrending of them all. Maddie had a rough time in her marriage, and this is just all about wounded souls being healed. It's a good story. I'm really proud of it.
Everyone, thank you very much for joining me for another conversation with Elizabeth Ellen Carter. Please do like and subscribe and share these interviews with everyone you know who loves reading historical romance and likes to go a little bit deeper into your favorite stories. Thank you very much. We'll see you next time.